start.
Recording going.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another session of Global Technopolitics Forum's weekly meeting on Sunday, August 15, 2021. So it's a short session. I would like to start it with discussing a project that we are going to, a proposal we are writing that's about China. Greg, do you want to talk a bit about it so everybody would be in the same wave, and maybe then we can discuss what Jennifer could do for this project?
We talked about it a little bit last time. The basic genesis of this is a conversation we had with the Office of Net Assessments in the Pentagon. And basically, their interest was in, they say, you know, we're good at counting the things that can be counted, like GDP and tanks and missiles, but we worry that we're missing really factors in the fabric of society that might be potential weaknesses of China, but also potential strengths. So our project is trying to focus on those. We've identified a number of elements which Buddy can run through, but the idea basically is to focus on those aspects of society that are really the underpinning of the manifestations of Chinese strength that we see, and really ask the question, which direction are these going? And in particular say, are they close to tipping points that might produce quite dramatic different futures? It's relatively easy to see in the demographic front that they're pretty close to falling off the demographic cliff. And so that obviously brings in train a big set of implications. That's probably better known, but we want to look at some other dimensions of society and ask the same kinds of questions there. Patty, you may want to say a bit more about those dimensions.
Yeah, I have been actually looking around and studying it. What I see about China is internally fragile and globally alone. So geopolitically alone, and even within a hostile environment. So while there are very impressive numbers in various fronts, again, when you go deep into them, they're questionable. There's a lot of posturing I see with China. So in terms of what factors we have identified so far, there are a lot of undercurrents happening in China. Some of them are old. There are these problems with some of at the edges of the country, with groups that perhaps not quite align with the ideology of China. Then there are religious kind of people or religious beliefs which is increasing. There is inequality that's also increasing. Then, of course, demographics that Greg spoke about. Inequalities are two different types. There are regional, meaning between urban and outside, and also and rural area, as well as within the urban area. So, and that's actually a huge challenge for them. There are environmental issues, a big challenge. There is the issue of their water shortages. Another big challenge is a housing bubble which is taking place, and there is a feeling that perhaps the economic growth is coming to its end or shrinking and becoming to its natural end, basically, especially thinking about demographics. So there are a lot of challenges, but every country has its own challenges. So the question is how they interact and to what extent they may be pointing to a tipping point, as Greg mentioned. So the interaction between these various factors are important to watch for. There's also corruption, a lot of corruption in China that they're head on trying to fight. The project, I think, Jennifer, you will be as good at looking, considering the research you have done in past, is the entrepreneurship or private sector. Right now, China is cracking down on its private sector, on big tech giants. Also, there may be a clash between state-owned enterprises and private enterprises in China. That's an area that's we need a better understanding, and how these big tech giants are contributing to inequalities in China. So there are those areas that needs a bit of investigation. Over to you, Greg, if I have missed anything.
No, that sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay,
And
yeah,
that
go on.
is appeals to you, Jennifer. No, I hope,
Yeah,
Jennifer, this
absolutely.
is something that could like to dig into because you'd be great, as Patty says, working on it.
Yeah, no,
I think we've got a good start, particularly the research she's done, and then I've done a lot of writing for my book project. I'm happy to share all that material with you. That's mostly now sort of a collection of things that I've seen and read that I need to put together into a chapter at some point.
Okay, yeah, no, that sounds great. Is there a copy like of the proposal we're applying for? Like just like to have like on paper kind of like what the end goal is of the research?
We have some ideas. We haven't quite pinpointed. So there's some ideas that I'm going to share with everybody. I haven't shared it because it hasn't been organized, but I will start to, first of all, the requirements and then our thoughts on it. And we have more time so we can kind of delve into it in next few weeks and structure it. At this moment, we are trying to explore ideas. Jennifer.
Sounds good. So I'll dive.
Yeah. So, Paul, do you have any comment to make on these areas?
Yeah, well, just two things. First of all, I from the last time I owe some comments or thoughts, which I've given it some thought, but I'll write them up and share them. But two things just in the discussion now. One is, I think, Greg, when you were introducing this, you mentioned that you were sort of looking at indicators outside of the numbers and statistics that are usually presented that are more related to social trends and social changes. And you mentioned that
Exactly.
These could be sort of negative ones that are risks, challenges, and so. But one thing that struck me was on the other side, things that actually could be perceived as strengths or positive factors. And it sounds like Patty, I think in the introduction or the overview that you just gave is sort of focused on what are these challenges and these sort of negative, but I wonder about the other side of the coin, and that is some of the strengths and whether that bears a little bit closer attention. So there's that part. And then Greg, just now you mentioned the book and a chapter from the book. I wonder if you could maybe describe that a little bit more, or does this, what you're talking about here, fit into the book, and if so, what's the larger context?
Just on the book, this is a book I've been working on for way too long. It was the effort was to look at the United States and the world side by side and ask how they interact. Then a lot of funny things happened. We had Mr. Trump elected and the pandemic, and so it's been a very much a moving target. So I've kind of slowed down and all the, but one of the key issues in that book is, it seems to me there are two big uncertainties about the world. One is about the United States and the role it's going to play. The other big uncertainty is about China. So trying to come to grips with both of those has been my task for the last 4 or 5 years. So I've been collecting stuff and reading stuff. That really, I was doing that before we began the forum. This is for me a nice chance to maybe bring that work to a conclusion and to deepen it. But you're exactly right that we're certainly on the lookout as well for aspects of strength or resiliency in China. And I think it would surprise most Americans. Maybe it wouldn't. But I haven't seen the most recent polls. But my guess is that the polls show that the Chinese are more confident about their country and its future than are Americans, right? And so that's something we want to look into in more detail as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for the background. I think I understand what you're saying. I'm
positive.
sorry. Okay. Yeah, so I think what you're saying is the book project is sort of about the U.S. Relative to the rest of the world.
Right.
And I assume there are a number of different dimensions that you've found or highlighted that you'll focus on within that bigger picture. And then the
Exactly.
China angle, clearly China is important. So that would conceivably be a chapter that would fit into that broader overview that you're considering.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the book, well, basically just a word more, the book begins with a chapter about sort of how we got to this gridlock and dysfunction at home. Then it looks at the nature of the international system and asks the question, is the liberal international order breaking down, or has it broken down beyond repair? And then it begins to look out. So it looks at China next, and cyber next, other technologies, goes that way, and then comes back in the last chapter or two, not clear whether it's going to be one or two, to the United States and what's likely to happen, what might happen to us next. And does raise the question, is there at least some considerable chance that the country won't physically stay together over a 20-year time horizon?
So bookended by those two views of the US, where we are now, what the next steps might be, and in between looking at the US relative to the rest of the world, but according to those different themes that you talked about. So it's sort of thematically arranged. Each chapter sort of focusing on a different aspect or key aspect, and then coming back to the US at the end saying, okay, now that we've looked at these different themes, what does the next step look like, or where does the US look like? I think you were saying, say, over the next 20-year period, what could the US look like going forward?
No, exactly. So very well said. Maybe I can use you as my agent, Paul. Thank you.
No, I'm just trying to. No. I mean, but it's helpful to know that, because then it helps in trying to make comments, or that to see what the bigger picture is. That's quite useful.
Yeah, but the focus is gonna, right now we're focusing on proposal for China. So that's the two different things. Proposal is for net, as Greg has explained. Yeah. So they may be very different from what Greg is going to select to put in the book, that kind of issues discussed there.
Understood. So, I mean, just two things strike me. And one is, China internally, but also China relative to other countries in its orbit there. So, if we think about China's weaknesses or its strengths, those aren't necessarily in a vacuum, right? So how do those weaknesses stack up to a Vietnam or a Philippines or a Korea? And are they weaknesses, or do they seem like such severe weaknesses when seen within the context of the countries that China is most closely connected with? And the other thing is, my sort of what strikes me is the party and the government structure. So I think that's something that is worth digging into, because I think that we tend to, in the US especially, say the party as if it's some sort of monolithic structure, but it isn't. In fact, there are a lot of different voices in the party, and not only that, but the party has changed its stripes or spots, or however you want to look at it, quite dramatically over the last decade or two. So the party as it looks now is very, very different than it was 15 or 20 years ago, which sort of gives you a sense that there's a certain dynamism, a certain energy, a certain flexibility that I don't think that the government really gets credit for. And I would see that as sort of a positive point, that the government has proven its ability to sort of pivot, quite rapidly, and shown a pretty flexible face, which I don't think gets enough attention in some way.
Yeah, in fact, very dramatically as well. So they have stepped back, reflected, and dramatically changed over the course of time, and successfully as well. So that's actually very impressive, the way they have evolved and changed. So Paul, it will be good to put these as bullet points, and we have done some research, so we can link those research, but it's good to have those. Puran, any comments?
Certainly, Pari. I mean, I heard everybody, and I think these are the great ideas. And being a China watcher, and as I said the last time, until about the COVID-19 broke out, I used to be in China at least once in a year. If it was more, no surprises, but once in a year. I think one area beyond what we have sort of conversed would be to look at how Chinese value and value systems are changing relative to millennials, in China. I mean, the people who
Yes.
are born after 2000 are the ones who are really driving the undercurrents within China. And I remember when COVID-19 broke out, one of my friends, who is a leading attorney in Shanghai, she was the first one to text me asking me what should she do because a doctor had died and there was a lot of, protest and all of that. I didn't really want to write to her anything, back through the text. So I wrote to her an email saying, look, this is a time when you need to be with your government, try and figure out, because, I didn't really want to write anything whereby I could be sort of trailed. I think one of the best parameters to figure out a bit deeper with how Chinese values are changing would also be to look at people who were born after 2000 and how are they really trying to change the broader Chinese values relative to value and thinking and how the Chinese government is responding to it. And what could be the positive side to it, as Paul was sort of trying to indicate? How could these millennials in China try and open up track 2 kind of a door? I think considering this point for the kind of the proposed project that we have been talking about would also be a very, very good idea. And I have just written a piece for being published in Europe, which is all about India-China engagement in Asia and beyond. And then I'm trying to look at what could be the kind of significance of economic instruments in bilateral relations. So I'll be very happy, once it is sort of reaching to some level, I'll be very happy to share it with you. And I have done some work here and there. So I'll be very happy to assist you from the point of view of whatever little I know. But I think examining this kind of, overall, our overarching value system, which is being thought through and propagated by millennials in China, and those were born after 2000. So that's my brief submission to you.
Great points. Actually, we did a bit of work on that, and there were several issues that came to fore. One was expression they use Ling Lu, and the other one was about Greg, do you want to explain the Ling Lu? And I think about the other one. The other one was some sort of return to some of the ideals of Maoism and communism and some of those ways of thinking. Basically, they want a better quality of life. When previous generation was very much about economic growth, this generation seems to be asking for a better quality of life. Greg, do you want to discuss a bit more? Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, the interesting thing to look at, I think, is just to ask how important this is. There certainly is this, as Patty says, this lying flat movement among young people, basically who've opted out, and lying flat means staying beneath the radar, as it were, but basically opting out of basically what's expected of them, that is to be big consumers and to help the economy grow, and hard workers. So it's hard work and consumption that have been the drivers, and this group has kind of opted out. And the question is, how important is it? And I don't have a good sense for that. We see lots of things written about it, but trying to find some indicators will be, I think, a challenge for us, because it is, as you say, but it's really important to look at the attitudes of not just the young millennials, but even the Gen Zers, those people actually born after 2000. So we ought to pay a special attention to that, I think. On the other hand, one of the people we talked to, one of the things we read, observed that one of the strengths of the Chinese system is that none of our last three presidents could have been anywhere near being president of China because they were all way too inexperienced. That the Chinese system does mean that people have to go through a very strong set of, not exactly apprenticeships, but positions of responsibility to get to the top. And that does mean a pretty meritocratic system. In some ways, that meritocracy is a couple thousand years old in China, but its current manifestation is at least impressive in some respects.
I mean, I've seen three things, Greg. One, Chinese usually have been people who have high egos, you know. The young guys do not really have that level of high ego, which means they are more accommodative, they're ready to think through, they're going out to engage with the world at large. So the ego part in the new young generation in China is sort of at a very stable level. Second thing is about hard work, as you said. Chinese usually are very hardworking, but what I have been seeing in the young generation in China is that they want to work hard, but not as hard as their predecessors did. So they want to do less and want to get more. As you rightly said, you know, they want to reap the dividends of economic well-being as quickly as they can. Third part is most of the Chinese are beginning to send their children out to study in the Western countries and Western economies. And that also really brings about some kind of an extra liberal values in these people. And then the fourth thing which I have seen, as I mentioned to you, when this COVID-19 broke out, I know the people, I mean, whoever I knew at least, a certain degree of, you know, proximity and closeness, they wrote to me saying, what should they really do? And they said, you know, you people are, you know, living in democracy, you know how to express yourself, you don't know what to do, etc., etc. So I think it'll be a very good idea to capture some of the changing strands in the new generation in China, which might be a pivot to sort of open another channel with the counterparts elsewhere. And it could also go, you know, in a very positive way, but then comparing and contrasting that with their, you know, predecessors would be a very, very good idea. Beyond everything else, economy, politics, you know, the diplomacy, how Chinese are going to go about, there being a very little difference between the state in China and the private sector. Everything is sort of, you know, juxtaposed and very hard to sort of decipher. So the business model, nobody knows how it really operates, because if you really look at their equity anywhere around the world, you will be really finding it pretty hard to figure out whether is the private sector in China which has put its money or equity in a business in India or elsewhere, or it is a Chinese state behind. So I think it will be a pretty fascinating study to undertake.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. So it will be good that I'm going to share a document. It will be good that as a bullet point, anybody has any idea to add to that document, and we just, you know, take it from there. And also any sources of data and information. Another angle we have is the expansion that China has in Central Asia and Africa, and how that expansion would impact China's capabilities in terms of technology. So what would be the impact of that internally for China? So that's another issue. We know it creates a lot of debt. We don't know in other respects what would happen, but that's another angle we are taking and looking at.
A question for Puran, actually. So just talking about the view of China, especially from India, what's your sense? Because we tend to, once again, I mean, at least I do, and I think a lot of people I know do, think about the fate and the conditions currently for Western firms that are operating in China, especially American firms. But what's the view look like from India? I don't know if you can comment on that, but you know, because at least traditionally, Indian firms, quite a lot of Indian firms were operating in China, especially in the area of software development. And the mantra was in China that we needed Indian firms because the Indians are sort of, roughly speaking, a similar sized country, a similar stage of development, but the Indians can speak English. And they are much more comfortable dealing with all these other countries. And so we depend on them to help us to act as that interface. And also because they have superior software development skills, that helps us as well. But is that still the case? What's the current fate of Indian companies in China? And does it give us any insight into how China's landscape is changing, for better or worse, within that, with the commercial interests? I don't know. I'm just throwing this out, but I don't know if you have any sense or not, but I'm curious.
This is very helpful, Paul. And two things. I mean, the premise is that both India and China, even though we are having, an ongoing military standoff in Himalayas, what has really happened is that there is a subtle understanding between China and India that they are too big to sort of, be cowed down by any one of these two. So they think that they are too big, and therefore they have got a role to play, not only in Asia, but beyond. And the bottom line for both of them is that big countries, the premise is that the big countries like China and India will any which way have a greater role to play because of their size and the kind of economic opportunity that they will offer to their own people domestically and to the world at large. So at the one level, they fight, they compete, both for influence and dominance in Asia and outside. But within everything else, as you rightly said, and this is what I've tried to sort of explore in my ESO brief, which is going to be out in Europe soon, which is about how India and China engage in Asia and beyond, and what is the kind of significance of economic instruments, including economic diplomacy in bilateral relationships between these two very large economies. One of the things, Paul, which has happened for a very long time between India and China is that they have got so deeply coupled, be the business, be the bilateral trade, commerce, people to people, contacts. It's very hard for both the countries to decouple. So be it economy, be it society, be it, exchange at, and then in India also we have Communist Party in India, which keeps, one of its legs into Chinese, Politburo. So while we are fighting with each other, both for dominance and influence, both in Asia and beyond, I am very, what should I say, convinced to say that India and China will find it pretty hard to decouple themselves from their economic relations. And while this military standoff is continuing to happen, I have also given, 3 paras where I have been trying to say that while military standoff continues, India and China continue to be more preferred trading partners compared to what India has been to US and what China has been to the US. So on the one hand, we are fighting with each other. On the other hand, we are finding it pretty hard to decouple ourselves both technologically, economically, and now we are seeing a big area of climate change, renewable energy, etc., etc. So I think our dependence on each other is not really going to go anywhere, but Chinese are having a very typical mindset where they want to really deal with security issues away from economic, while India is saying that unless we improve our border, relationships, economy will not really improve. So it's a very complicated kind of a relationship between India and China, but I don't see that decoupling happening anytime soon. So it is going to go on for some more time. And then at least 3 to 5 years time, we have to wait. So complicated, but very unique and quite differentiated as well.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Interesting, yes.
Very
I
interesting.
think I would say the same thing about the United States and China, that we're, much as we might want to decouple, we're much too tightly coupled economically to do that, supply chains and all the rest. There's been a lot of talk, but as I see, not so much actual change, simply because China's so, and those supply chains in China are also so important.
And also,
Yeah, I mean, I sort of,
Greg, I could probably compare India, China vis-a-vis Europe and US. They're too deeply into security, economy, intelligence sharing. They will never, ever be able to decouple completely. Of course, the depth and, size of that could probably keep on changing. But I think if we were to really look at UK and EU, for example, they're not really going to decouple. They will not be able to decouple themselves completely from each other, given their, historical relationship, security, economy, intelligence sharing. And Europe, I mean, I have lived in Berlin for 3.5, 4 years. I found that Europeans need security and guarantee for their peace and security. And for that, they can do anything. So what really applies between US and EU on the one hand, UK and the EU on the other hand, the same really applies to what is really happening or will happen between India and China. So that's a kind of a broad tentative equivalence, if I could lay out.
But I think this side, there isn't any animosity. There isn't serious conflict. Between India and China, there are some animosity and conflict. This side, actually, there isn't between US and Europe or between UK and EU. They have differences, but I don't see much of conflict or animosity. It's more of a friendly, friendly separation. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, any other comments from anybody?
Well, thank you. This has been helpful. It's been helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm gonna, as I mentioned, share a document, and would be great if everybody puts their ideas and as a bullet point or a short writing with links would be really helpful. And
so we should add to that document, Pari, you're saying, just supplement.
I think so, yes.
Okay, perfect.
I think it will be very helpful to add, our thoughts and collaborate on the document and turn it to something that, is more comprehensive in terms of, because otherwise it will be limited to my thought or Greg's, but if everybody adds to it, it will be more comprehensive and diverse, which is very helpful. Also, Puran, I sent you an email, I think last week. I asked for a short profile and then a picture. I don't think I have received that. And also your last article, would you like us to publish it?
What I'm going to do is, and I'm so sorry, Pari, that I didn't really get your mail where you asked me to send, a little profile.
I will send it
myself. I'm very sorry about it, but I'll do it. You need not really send it, but I will really, follow it up and send you both things. The second part is that I'll be giving you, the issue brief, which I have just done, India, China. Just have a look at it while it is coming out in Europe. But I will really be very happy to sort of share it with you, so have a look at it. And then I'll be very happy to share, this universal income thing, which is coming up in Africa. I'll be very happy to share that with you as well, so that you could consider. And I'll be only happy to, have it printed, because, printed, published, online, whichever way it is. So you always feel happy when you see, what you have done is appearing somewhere, whether online, offline, so that it helps somebody somewhere. And I'll be very happy to share both these two things with you, and maybe by tomorrow.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So on that note, I think I am going to wish everybody a wonderful week ahead. Thank you for joining us today. And Jennifer, I will be in touch with you, and wish you all well. Thank you very much.
Have a good week.
Take care.
Thank you.
Week.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful
care.
week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.